Our story begins in 1911. Raymond Pointrenaud is celebrating a promotion at a cabaret in Paris. He is now Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Most of the public would be shocked to see him in a place like this, but he's not worried. What happens in the Moulin Rouge seems to stay there too. At the same time, Monsieur Chopard is walking home after a few drinks when nature calls. There's no one at the Place des Pyramids, so he decides to relieve himself near the central monument, even cracking a few jokes at the statue. That attitude changes quickly when ghastly lights start to swirl around the statue. He's too scared to notice it's just an optical illusion. The lights are coming from an experiment taking place in Professor Esperandeu's apartment, an expert in different fields of science. He's also the author of the book titled Is There Life After Death? And we're about to see that he finally has the answer to that question. As a direct result of the experiment in his living room, something is happening on the other side of the city. An enormous egg is hatching, and the eye peeking through the crack is not a duckling's. Bound by some kind of connection, Esperandeu enacts the same movements as the newly born creature, as if teaching it how to fly. The pterodactyl is a fast learner, soon breaking through the ceiling into the night sky. Right now, Pointrenaud is in the back seat of his car and he's in excellent company. The driver's doing his best to ignore what's happening behind him. And then something unbelievable happens right in front of him. A pterodactyl smashes the windshield and then lands on top of them. Biting through the ceiling, the car moves erratically until falling into the river. Inspector Capone is yanked out of his nap by the phone ringing. He sounds more annoyed than concerned at Monsieur Chopard's crazy story about magic lights and giant birds. A few blocks away, Andrzej Jabrowski is writing a love letter to Adele Blanc. She's a famed journalist, and this young man's been madly in love with her since their brief encounter at a book signing. Adele's next book is on the Inca civilization, which is why her editor firmly believes that right now she's in Peru, not in Egypt, not riding a camel assisted by her friend Aziz, and certainly not joined by a group of bandits. They ascend into an underground embalming room. This is where bodies were prepared before the machine wrapped it in 20 layers of bandages. Someone finds the symbols they're looking for, and that's when we see why she's letting these guys come along. They have the missing parts of the manual. Putting them together, Adele follows the instructions to access a secret passage. As soon as it's open, the bandits try to get rid of her. Not afraid at all, she informs them about the dark goo leaking out and how dangerously flammable it is. That's enough to entertain the idiots while she moves on to decipher something else. Another passage is opened, revealing a long corridor that leads to a large treasure room. The men immediately dive into the heaps of gold with hysterical laughter, while Adele studies a specific sarcophagus. Aziz says it's too heavy for that weak ladder, and she tells him to find the secret exit. There is also one. Up on the surface, a group of armed men is coming after them. The bandits are filling their pockets now, which doesn't stop them from being judgmental about Adele opening the tomb. She says the man inside is the legendary Patmos, Ramses II's personal doctor, and he happens to be needed in Paris right now. Her explanation is rudely interrupted by Professor Dulaval arriving with the armed men, but he wants to hear the rest. So she tells him about Agathe, her twin sister who's very ill. Patmos is her last hope to save her because he was the greatest doctor who ever lived. And about the fact that he's not actually living at the moment, she plans to correct that with the help of Professor Esperandeu and his resurrection experiments. Dulaval laughs at her plan, at the stupid bandits, and even at the pharaoh. Adele warns him that mummies can hear everything, which makes him laugh even more. While she's taken by his men, Aziz tells her that he checked every wall and there's no exit. In the larger room, a firing squad is waiting for her. Adele asks for a cigarette as her last wish. In order to light it for her, Dulaval gets too close. She kicks him hard and throws him into the bandage machine before using his lighter to set the black goo on fire. The flames quickly start to consume everything. Adele jumps into the doctor's tomb, knocking it over, and that's what opens the secret exit route. The sarcophagus is pretty much flushed down and then resurfaces in the river. While she rows her tomb away, Dulaval is being helped out of his involuntary mummy costume. As soon as he can speak again, he vows to seek revenge. Back in Paris, Inspector Capone is taking Monsieur Chopard's testimony. not too happy about the level of alcohol in his blood. He says there was a woman on the backseat with Pointrenaud and that she wasn't wearing much. Capone retorts that Pointrenaud is the founder of Christian Aid, and such accusations make no sense. Not to mention the part about the car pecking giant bird. But then a constable barges in to say the passengers have been identified, and it was indeed the famous politician, his driver, and an exotic dancer. Capone urges his men to keep this totally confidential. Needless to say, the whole affair hits the headlines in a matter of hours. Even the president is consulted about it, but his comments are limited to sending his condolences to the poor widow. Just as he's saying that a pterodactyl in the 20th century is a pathetic farce, a quick look outside is enough to change his mind. He calls Interior Affairs to say they must not dismiss the case as a joke. It could be some subversive trick. And that is the first of a long chain of phone calls down the chain of command, each one adding more urgency to the matter until poor Inspector Capone is given 24 hours to provide results. At the Botanical Gardens Museum, Andrej is surprised at the hatched egg. Professor Menard shows him it was broken from the inside. He also points out the recent damage to the ceiling, which would explain the absence of the newly born in the premises. Inspector Capone arrives to question them, but Menard sends him to a specialist in the Jurassic period. Pointing at the egg, Capone says it would make a hell of an omelet. He completely misses the connection. The only person not baffled by the creature is Professor Esperanto. Luring his new friend in with a massive chunk of meat, he calls it "my baby" and keeps feeding it until the doorbell rings. Inspector Capone is here to learn more about dinosaurs. Without much of a choice, the professor invites them in. He starts to talk about how little we really know about these extinct animals. When a growling noise is heard, Esperanto blames it on his toucan and goes on with a lecture about pterodactyls. They were fierce carnivore predators, and their females laid only one single egg at a time. That explains their violent behavior when protecting their offspring. Capone is listening to this while meticulously peeling his hard-boiled egg, ignorant of the yellow eye that follows his movements from behind the curtains. The moment he takes a bite, the pterodactyl has a total fit. Esperanto's apartment is all but destroyed when the creature flies off the window. Scared to death and very angry, Capone orders the professor's immediate arrest. At the same time, Adele arrives in Paris with her deceased companion, Patmosis. She's welcomed by her editor, François Xavier, who has endless questions about the Peruvian mysteries that she's now ready to unpack to her avid readers. Without batting an eyelid, she claims to have climbed Machu Picchu every morning. When Adele gets home, her maid, Miranda, can't even bring herself to guess what fresh hell might be inside the box. There's a heap of letters on the side table, all from Andrej. She ignores them and shows Miranda to the door before going to Agatha's bedroom. When she said her sister was ill, she wasn't kidding. After trying some blush on her cheeks, which was of no help at all, Adele cheerfully introduces Patmosis as her new doctor. He'll be staying inside the cabinet until she can contact the man to revive him. On her way out, she finds Andrej at her doorstep. He's about to leave her one more letter. A bit annoyed by the delay, she picks it up and puts it with the others. Only then, she sees the newspaper on the same table and finds out about the whole pterodactyl incident. Esperanto is on the death row in La Sante. A guard tells him that his lawyer's here to see him, and there she is, fake mustache and all. She tells him about Patmosis and says a 4,000-year-old Egyptian will be child's play if he's just revived a bird that had been dead for 130 million years. He explains that reviving is not as much of a problem as being locked up. Also, the pterodactyl is draining his energy because its predatorial instincts kick in as soon as Esperanto dozes off. Adele gets kicked out by the guards when the real attorneys show up. Not too far from there, dozens of reports are gathered around Mr. St. Hubert. He's a celebrity explorer invited by Inspector Capone to provide assistance on the dinosaur issue. While Adele tries several different disguises to infiltrate La Sante and free Professor Esperanto, Hubert shows Capone a map of Paris. He marks the 3 spots where a Jurassic predator could find any sheep. Visiting the first 2, the expedition concludes there are no sheep missing, except for the one Hubert shoots by accident. The only place left to check is the Botanical Gardens, and they decide to head there at first light tomorrow. At the same time, Adele finally gains access to the professor's cell, only to find someone else in there. Esperanto has been transferred because his execution is tomorrow morning unless he gets a pardon. When Mademoiselle Adele Blanc's visit is announced, the president is playing with his beloved dog, Nelson. By now, we've seen her do so much stuff that it's easy to forget she's primarily a journalist. The president's very first interview after taking office was with her. So here she is now trying to talk him into a pardon. But the thing is, pterodactyl resurrection is something bound to remain in the spotlight until a culprit can be blamed for the mess. All she gets is a promise to think about it. But even that vanishes when the bird of the hour makes an appearance at the presidential lawn and snatches poor little Nelson no less. Near the botanical gardens, no one could possibly tell a real sheep from these two. Hubert and Capone have definitely taken things to the next level, and yet they're still unaware of the pterodactyl's improvised nest only a few meters away. After extensive research, Andrzej has made incredible progress with the animal, now fully trained to come back to that spot. He even brought a pet of his own, as we can see Nelson alive and well in his new home. Now, of course, saving the president's life is exactly the kind of good deed that will not go unpunished. It's only after a long and detailed statement that Adele is free to go. Looking defeated for the first time, she tells her catatonic sister that her plan is not going so well. In need of a restorative bath, she starts to read Andrzej's letters, and the most recent one is about his new pet. That's all she needs to bounce back. In a few moments, she's the one knocking on Andrzej's door, with a thank you kiss and all. He takes her to see his achievements. Adele and the pterodactyl get along so well that she decides to carry out her craziest idea so far and hop on its back. It can't be harder than a camel, she says. And believe it or not, that turns out to be right. Adele is crossing the Parisian sky while Esperanto takes those famous last steps to the guillotine. Everyone there is ready for some sick entertainment, but they surely get much more than they bargained for. A pardon comes from above and not from a higher power. Grabbed at the last minute by his prehistorical soulmate, the poor man is taken to the botanical gardens. Now, that's too much to miss, even for Hubert. Following the odd trio, he gets to the nest. The two scientists are having a dorky reunion that Adele is trying to cut short and get down to business. Not knowing about the connection between the human professor and the pterodactyl, Hubert fires at his target and gets both of them badly wounded. Professor Menard is furious to see that, and he takes the gun from that stupid man, threatening to hunt him down for a change. Andrzej is left with the dangerous task of playing dinosaur vet, while Adele takes the other victim home. Following his instructions, she organizes a circle of ancient objects. The procedure seems to be working as everything starts to fly around them. But then, Esperanto lets out a loud pterodactyl cry. Both man and animal fall to the ground, to Adele's complete despair. So that's it? Was it all for nothing? Not according to Patmosis, who has just come back to life with a sneeze. He apologizes for his manners and starts to explore the room, and even makes himself some tea, but there's still one more blow coming her way, unfortunately. Patmosis explains that he is a nuclear physicist, not a physician at all. He's very sad to give her such news because, just as she said herself, he's been listening to everything all along. He knows how much she loves her sister and how badly she wants her to be cured. So Patmosis asks what happened to her. Just after their 20th birthday, Adele and Agathe took up tennis as a hobby. Their competitive nature made the game fascinating to the audience but dangerous to the players. And then a wrong move makes an ordinary fall turn into a freak accident. After sharing that sad story, Adele starts to put together some of the mummy's comments since his resurrection. He said the procedure performed by Esperanto had a 2-mile reach, and he also mentioned something about the burial of doctors back in the day. They were placed together with the pharaoh, he says. Looking at an ad for Ramses II's exhibition, Adele is back on track once again, just as Monsieur Chopard is back at the Place des Pyramids. This time, he keeps a fast pace and looks over his shoulder constantly. But that won't help much when the undead come asking for directions. Patmosis laughs at the poor man passing out, and that was not even part of any plan. It was just for fun. Adele tells him off for that while pushing Agathe's chair towards the Louvre. Patmosis may not be a doctor, but he has magical powers to make up for that. He doesn't even need to touch the locked gate to get it open. The night guards are not a problem either. When they get to Ramses II's room, they go tomb by tomb looking for the doctor. Patmosis was right. All of them are awake, so it's time to wake up the boss too. After a long yawn, Ramses mocks Patmos's clothing and demands some explanations about such a rude interruption of his sacred slumber. Adele tells him about Agathe in heartfelt tears. Ramses leaves it to his faithful Dr. Nobesis. The first thing he does is to remove the hat pin from her head, against all the previous advice from modern doctors. Then he drops a liquid into the pharaoh's entrails, much to Adele's disgust. The mix produces a blue substance that he rubs into the exit wound before wrapping her head in bandages provided by a volunteer. Moments later, Agatha wakes up like nothing happened, complaining about that tennis match that happened 5 years ago. Adele hugs her tight and says goodbye to Patmosis. While the twins reunite, the mummies gain the streets of Paris. Of course, Monsieur Chopard is there to witness that too. Ramses II admires the Louvre and its courtyard, saying it could use a pyramid right in the middle. The next morning, the vanishing mummies make the headlines all over Paris. The phone call chain is triggered one more time, and again, it ends on Capone's plate. At the Blanc sec home, finally there's someone happy to see Andrzej. Agatha invites him in for some tea and explains that Adele is out on vacation. Real vacation this time, nothing exotic or dangerous. It's just a trip to the US, in fact, aboard Titanic. And this is the end. This was a recap of the 2010 movie The Extraordinary Adventures of Adele Blanc-Sec by EuropaCorp, starring Louise Bourgeon and Matthew Amalric. So what do you make of this crazy story? If you could, would you prefer talking to a pharaoh or riding a pterodactyl? Let us know in the comments below with #CinemaRecap. Until next time.